So the other day, Mother's Basement put out a video in regards to Recreators, stating that he believes it's a modern classic in the making. After finishing the video, it had me thinking, why are people so concerned with finding modern classics? And is that cause necessarily worth pursuing at all? The first aspect that's important to establish is, what does Geoff mean when he says classic? Because depending on where one is and what environments they're a part of, what can be considered a classic may vary. For example, in Japan, a show like Doraemon may be considered a classic. The anime's been running since 1973, and it's still going on to this day. But where I am, in the United States, most probably wouldn't consider it a classic. It wasn't on television to my knowledge until it started on Disney XD back in 2014, a channel that not many people have access to. Now, this difference in what can be a classic is not just present between different countries, but different parts of the community as well. For example, the shonen community would be less likely to consider a work such as Serial Experiments Lain a classic, because it appeals less towards what a lot of that community likes, which is shonen fighting series. So with all of that in mind, I'd say that the community Geoff is aiming for here is the general MyAnimeList crowd. What cements this even further is that he brings up Recreators' position in popularity this season, and talks about it in reference to other shows that are very popular on MyAnimeList, like Death Note, which is number 1 in popularity, and Code Geass, which is number 6 in popularity on MyAnimeList respectively. But this leaves the question, why bother trying to find modern classics? One of the initial reasons I feel like people want to find those modern classics is because of what kind of process seasonal anime watching is. When going through those shows, you need to comb through everything, sometimes knowing where to look for the stuff that will appeal to you the most and stick with you forever is no easy task. We're at a point where there's roughly 40 shows that come out per season, which is definitely nothing to scoff at. Furthermore, what people may initially praise could end up disappointing the consensus audience in that community. Take for example last season, Masamune-kun's Revenge. It was fairly well received in the beginning and was one of the top shows on MyAnimeList. By the time the season ended, its reception was less than stellar, to say the least. Now, one may say that a series such as that never quite had the label of classic in the making, and to my knowledge, that's true. I did not once hear anyone claiming that show was going to be a classic, but that just shows how different seasonal reception and hype is from staying power. Furthermore, I can think of hype titles where people were praising it to be a modern classic that ended up not quite meeting those expectations. Erased, while by no means a poorly received show in most communities, did disappoint a good number of individuals, and certainly didn't stick in the consensus's mind as much once Re:Zero came out the next season. Mostly due in part by Re:Zero having a similar concept, but also being longer and having a fantasy setting that very much appeals to consensus sensibilities of more communities, even to this day. To some, it's just enough to find shows they're enjoying, to find whatever will keep them going at that particular moment in time. But for those who want to search for modern classics and make that claim, there are many reasons one may have that incentive. One reason is because they want to be the first to find them. It comes from this desire to be rooting for a show before anyone else. After all, who doesn't want to be right about something? And not just right, but the first one to be right. It's very empowering, because it almost feels like you were part of a movement in some way. By praising a show and sticking with it from the beginning, you played a role in it becoming a classic. Now, however true or false that may be, it still feels that way to the viewer. I also believe it comes from this desire to adhere to consensus. Many people don't like being the contrarians, being the odd ones out. So by calling a work a modern classic, it's assuring that even if the consensus in their community right now isn't exactly raving over an anime like they are, this consensus will be one day. that if people stick with the show long enough, they will no longer be the contrarians, which is a good feeling to many, as then they won't feel like their own ideas of what's good is alien from others in their community. Another big reason is just as a means to have people talk about the show. Calling anything a modern classic grabs people's attention, certainly. Even Geoff in his video stated how he felt Recreators was severely underrated in comparison to other shows this season, and by calling it a classic, he's putting more attention towards that show and getting more people to watch it, as well as making an attempt to get more people to see from his own point of view. Now, one may argue that such is the purpose of almost any positive analysis video, and I'd agree. However, by calling it a modern classic, it's a more extreme take on such a thing. It's more likely to catch the attention of the viewer since it's so extreme. There's also individuals who are just fascinated by what stays in audiences' minds and what ends up being forgotten. Those that are less interested in their own personal tastes being confirmed in consensus, and just more interested in what they think specific communities will latch onto most. I enjoy doing this on occasion since it can be a bit fun making little predictions, especially before the season starts, on what shows certain communities will end up really caring about, and what will end up flopping. Now, as for me personally, I don't really see much of a point in trying to find modern classics other than just as a fun prediction game. My tastes very much deviate from the consensus quite often, and a few shows in my favorites list have been forgotten entirely by time. I really have no problem with this. Obviously, not everyone's going to feel the same exact way about everything. That's how criticism and discussion is formed. While I seek to be understood in why I think the way I do, there's not a massive desire for my favorite shows to be looked back on as the best of the best. If people like the shows I like, that's cool, and if they don't, well, that's just another reason to write a piece on it, so I can get people to understand why I came to my conclusion. Now, I certainly get why people are so caught up in it, and while I'm in no position to tell people how they should approach anime, I don't really think we should be worrying about whether or not our favorite shows become classics in specific communities. It's fun to predict, certainly, and I have no problem with people discussing it, but I don't think that it should ever come to a point where people are afraid of their favorite shows being forgotten. It's nice to agree with the consensus on what the classics are, but it's not a must, nor should it ever be a must. Especially since, depending on the community, a show can still be viewed as a classic. Just because one community isn't a fan of your favorite shows, doesn't mean another community can't end up latching onto it. Even if that community may be smaller, their voice is still important all the same. So, is Recreators a modern classic? I have no idea, and I don't think it's worth worrying too much about. Like what you like, dislike what you dislike, just have a darn good reason for whatever position you take.